Life's been good to me so far. What the was that? Well, what you were supposed to hear was this clattering sound under the hood of this Mercury. And I've seen it on other channels where they say if the cars, the Crown Vics or the Grand Marks get, say 200,000-300,000 miles on them, that the fan breaks because it's made of ABS plastic. Well, there is an exception to every rule, and this is one of them. This car only has 41,000 miles on it now, but it is a 2003, so it's not the mileage. It's probably more like everything else, the age of the plastic. Everything gets older that mankind makes, it gets brittle and it breaks. Hey, that's almost a rhyme. Anyway, what I'm going to do is replace this unit. When I started it up, it was supposed to make that clattering sound. Well, the other day I put some of that super strong tape on it. It didn't work at first, but now it's nice and cool. Everything cooled off, so probably if it heats up, it'll bust loose again, but it seemed to work. I'm not leaving it in there because I did see the crack, and that's what we're going to do is replace this. So let's go. I'll try to make it as quick as possible. First thing I'm going to do is disconnect the battery. I always try to do that, and that's just a good safety thing because it's an electric fan. And here comes a truck to bust up my video. Thanks, Bubba. So let me disconnect this. And that was with an 8mm socket. Everything in this procedure is basically an 8mm socket and a good pair of slip joint pliers. So next we'll disconnect the power cord, which is right next to your power steering reservoir. Now some guys can figure out how to get these new electronic connectors apart. They seem to change them every decade or so. The best thing to do that I suggest is think like a demented SOB and figure out how you can destroy the afternoon of some average schmuckatelli who's just trying to fix it himself. And you'll figure it out. In this case, I use a skinny pair of needle nose and I stick it underneath the flange, and then I use a regular flat blade screwdriver and pop it loose. I'll try and get this in there so you can see it. Hang on. And right here, you're going to see this little flange. I stick it down underneath and pop it up. It looks like it should be pressed down, but no, it actually likes to be popped up. And then I stick the flat blade screwdriver against that little piece of the bottom section and just kind of leverage it that way, and this section of the connector pops loose. This one stays on the fan shroud. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to suck out all the coolant from the tank up here on top of the radiator. Number one, because this has to come off, at least the way I do it, it has to come off. It has a screw that goes into the shroud and the support on the front, and you'll see what happens. We'll take this off, but I drain it out. I use some pliers and I squeeze this clamp here, pop this hose loose, and then there's a hose underneath, a bigger one with a bigger clamp that I'll squeeze together. And I'm just using these like channel lock, like Carolina speed wrench, and we'll get that off. And I also wanted to add, I use like a tool like this little guy. You guys can use whatever thing you want to, but it keeps the antifreeze from getting on the ground so no animals lick it up. And it's also very expensive now, maybe even harder to get. So I'll just put this little gizmo in there and I will reuse that. How about that? Alright, so here's the Reservoir. You see it's got these tabs here. Oops, a little bit of stuff left there. Well, they go inside. They go inside of these slots right here on the shroud. Now, when you replace this assembly, they send you a whole new shroud. They won't send you just the individual pieces, so that's why I'm taking these two things off. I did have to have my, just so you know, my siphon pump ready because the car's parked a little bit on an angle down, so the block wanted to push up some extra antifreeze, and I was ready with my pump and sucked that enough so that it's down here. Don't worry about adding it back in. You go through the same process as if you were just doing a drain and fill, where you would just put it back in the tank and keep an eye on it, watch it go down, and then add to it. So everything I took out of it, I know can go back into it. Down below, you may not be able to see it without some kind of light. See these two hoses right there? They just sit into plastic couplers that hang on to it. You can just pop those off. Those are the transmission coolant line hoses. So that's easy, that just pops loose. Once you take these off on the top, these two, then there's another one. Let's see if I can get under there. Well, if you follow right there, you can't see it because the light's now washing it out. There's a 8mm bolt right there. There's one on each side. There's also a tab a little further down. See if I can get to it. Pointing my light right at it. And the radiator has a tab that picks up on a tab that sticks out from the shroud and just kind of sits down in the assembly. So next I'll take the reservoir pump off. And also your other radiator hose rests on a plastic extension. You just have to pick the hose up and set it aside. So we'll do that. And just so you know, the bottom of the power steering reservoir also has a little tab that fits right into a slot in the fan shroud. You can just about see that little bevel under there, can't you? Okay, now we're going to just pick up that hose down there, that radiator hose, move it off to the side, and get ready to take the fan shroud off. Alright, I've got the hose moved, that's disconnected. I've got the two bolts on either side of this housing assembly pulled out. They're all 8mm, by the way. Every bolt head or nut that I had to touch on this was 8mm. So let's see if I can get this out. Let's deflate just a little bit. Oh yeah. Just caught on those little plastic clamps. Gotta move a few things aside. And here we have the assembly. You might be able to see where the brake was. The brake was right here. Looks like that tape did hold in an emergency, just so you know. I used the rubberized metallic duct tape. And I also put the same amount just opposite on this side of the fan blade to help balance it out. So actually this did work. Is it a permanent thing? No, but just in case, there you go. And if I had to fix this the right way or make a duplicate of this, it looks like you can knock this off the armature of the motor. So I'm going to save this because it's still working. Yeah, it takes up space, but in a day of You don't know if you can get it or not. I'm going to save it. Now here's the new one right out of the box. And you're going to make sure it looks just like your old one. This one has a different looking controller on it. The original one was made by Bosch. So if this one doesn't work or has a problem down the road, I'll be sure to get back to the one I have saved, which I know still works. Other than that, everything else looks the same. We'll put her in, button it up, just do the reverse of what I did, and we'll see what happens. So we're going to take those 8mm, two of them, 8mm bolts, and put them on each end to hold that radiator fan up, that assembly. And remember that you have the two tongs at the bottom, below where the bolts go, that have to go onto that tank mount. And that'll hold everything in place. So let's do that. Alright, now I'm going to reach down, put that lower radiator hose back up on that little support hanger at the bottom. And an important thing to note, make sure that that new fan shroud has the speed nuts attached to it so you can put your reservoirs back on. If it doesn't come with it, then make sure you take it off of your old one. It's pretty easy to figure out. So, I've got the reservoir here. I've put the hose back up on the bottom, and now I'm just putting back the coolant reservoir. Off we go. And I also noticed that the new one does not have the hose holders for your transmission coolant line, so I took it off the old one. I'm putting it on the new one, no problem. Mine was a little tight going together. Of course, that's brand new, so you would expect that, but make sure that that connector's all the way up and locked in so it doesn't rattle loose, or you could have an overheating problem. Next, I think what we'll do is hook up the battery and add our antifreeze that we took out, double check everything, and then crank it up and see what happens. Well, it starts up, nothing apparently is popping out. So this thing's got to get warmed up a bit, and then we'll test it out. I think everything's going to work just fine. You'll have good luck with yours. I know it. There it is. It's running. You can barely hear it. That's a success. Thanks for watching. See you next time.